I don't really have any living family, so my family's work is family to me. So when books get read, when paintings get seen, when songs get sung, it's keeping them alive, and they're still talking to another generation, and that kind of is more than just a book or a painting or a song. It's something that's much more living.
Very excited to be here tonight to celebrate Marana Comstock's book that she discovered in a trunk in her home by her grandfather, his memoirs of being a member of the Algonquin Round Table. It's incredible, yep.
And when was this first brought to your attention?
Well, Marana sent me a note about her discovery, and knowing that one of the things SUNY Press specializes in is books on New York history. And when I saw Algonquin Roundtable, I jumped up and said, hey.
It's a great legacy for us all. I mean, this is the oldest historic hotel in New York that's still around. It predated the Waldorf, the Plaza, but I'm just very, very blessed to be a part of it.
What's that? It's going to be a great night. I good. And here's to Marana. Okay.
And my daughter is an aspiring actress. She's 18, and she was just accepted based on two.
I wanted to welcome everyone tonight. Thank you for coming for this event. I'm Richard Carlin. I am from SUNY Press and Excelsior Editions. We are the publishers of the book we're celebrating tonight by Konrad Bercovici on the Algonquin Hotel, his memoirs of being a longtime member of the Algonquin Round Table. Is undeservedly not known, and I hope this is the beginning of a true Bercovici time. Because he really deserves to be better known.
Thank you for that introduction. And welcome everyone here for the launch of my grandfather, Konrad Bercovici's The Algonquin Round Table, 25 years with the Legends Who Lunch, which I guess sort of makes us the Legends Who Launch. Hope everyone's enjoying the refreshments. We also invited the ghosts of Algonquinites past. So they're kind of a thirsty crowd, so get it while you can. Caustic crowd as well as a thirsty crowd. They're experts tonight here, as Richard pointed out, who will talk, read, even sing about their experiences at the Algonquin. I am not an expert in any of that. I am, however, somewhat of an expert in the author, it being my grandfather, and having discovered the manuscript in family papers I inherited. There were a few other works in there too that are being pursued, and stay tuned for that information because there's quite a bit of material from the family. Despite the fact that the Algonquin Round Table was written almost 75 years ago, it is very fresh and there is nothing old-fashioned or fussy about it. Grandpa was a born storyteller, but he was also a journalist, and the combination makes things very accessible, very readable. He puts you in the moment, and in this case, he puts you at that table. To the extent that when I went through the book looking for passages to read tonight, there were so many passages that were fun and a good read, and a lot of stickies came into play. And I thought, don't worry, we're not going to be here all night. I'm not going to read all of them, but I hope that everybody here will. So without much delay, I'm going to start by reading from the foreword, which I actually wrote to give everybody sort of a context of the grandfather who is behind the truly grand writer and man. My mother liked to tell this story. So do I. One sunny Sunday afternoon, on a bus heading up New York's Riverside Drive, she overheard a fellow passenger observe, "There goes an oak tree out walking with a daisy." She then caught sight of what they were observing, a striking, peasant-sturdy older gentleman with a big mustache holding hands with a blonde little girl as they crossed from Riverside Park and disappeared into an apartment building facing it. He was my grandpa, Konrad Bercovici. I was that daisy. Like some sort of creative commune, for much of my childhood, my mother, brother, grandparents, aunt, and I all shared an apartment in that building. Most of the rooms overlooked the park, Hudson River, and the George Washington Bridge beyond. The ever-changing views of water and sky were considered essential not only for painting, but also for your brain to breathe in writing, composing, playing music, or just thinking. Do not disturb signs were frequently posted on the closed doors of the apartment's rooms, and although everyone was quite communicative, there were so many stories to tell. You never bothered anyone while they were working. The thundering chords emanating from Grandpa's Hammond organ did not count as a disturbance. It was, after all, Bach. An internationally acclaimed writer, journalist, and historian, Konrad Bercovici authored 40 books, hundreds of short stories, plays, screenplays, magazines, and newspaper articles, all while raising 4 brilliant, highly independent children with my grandmother, artist Naomi, and maintaining households in Hollywood, New York, Connecticut, and Paris. I really can't figure out how he did it. Sure, no TV, but I also remember my mother telling me Grandpa just didn't need the same amount of sleep as other people did. When he was younger, he would get up early and go dance in the woods to burn off excess energy without waking up his sleeping family. It's funny to imagine him out there in the wee hours, head back, barrel chest thrust forward, arms and legs flung about. What did the animals think? In addition to his impressive body of published work, there are also thousands of pages of unpublished manuscripts, books, stories, articles, plays, even reality series concepts. There are photographs of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks on the black lot, Charlie Chaplin and Paulette Goddard at the theater, Lou Nizer and Joe DiMaggio around the Algonquin Round Table. My favorite, however, is one in which you could hardly even see Grandpa. He's a tiny speck in a white suit, lecturing thousands of troops during World War II about the dangers of Hitler and the Nazis. There was also lots of writing about his writing, hundreds of laudatory reviews and interviews, and crumbling newsprint from all over the world. The New York Times hailing Konrad Bercovici as a master romancer, future generations will rank with Chekhov and Maupassant. Famed short story editor Edward J. O'Brien calling him America's master of the short story. John Reed, who wrote the introduction to Grandpa's first book, Crimes of Charity, declaring his literary power of absolute conviction. At first I tried hard to resist reading the manuscripts themselves. If you started, you just couldn't put them down and ended up reading instead of filing or organizing. But then again, that is how I discovered the unpublished work. A romantic novel set against the gentrification of Greenwich Village in the 1950s. Memoir stories about a circle that included Chaplin, Hemingway, Dreiser, Fitzgerald, Einstein, so many luminaries who called him friend, collaborator, mentor, and at times brutally honest critic. And ultimately, the Algonquin Round Table, an insider's view of the legendary place many of these luminaries thought of as their home away from home. I remember when Grandpa would go to the Algonquin for lunch, usually in a suit, sometimes with a gypsy red shirt under the jacket, always with a smile so big even that mustache couldn't hide it. Reading the Algonquin Round Table, I feel as if I am lunching him with him and that golden era's incredible who's who of fellow guests. Reading the family papers, Konrad Bercovici's story, I realized how closely the romance and adventure of his life and work are intertwined. As the New York Times headlined on the loss of one of their own, journalist, film writer, author, the romanticism of his career was reflected in his work. Konrad Bercovici was a writer of great gusto, a world traveler who enriched his writing talent in the tradition of the determined journeyman of life. And what a journey it was. This is a quick piece about laughter. You could have told by the laughter you heard whether Dorothy Parker was in the dining room. Her laughter is like one of the sharp, reverberating thunderclaps early in spring. It was generally followed by the laughter of her table companions, Edna Ferber, Mark Connolly, and Franklin P. Adams. George S. Kaufman's loudest expression of mirth is a scratch on his unshaven chin. For years now, I have tried to catch him laughing, him and Groucho Marx, whom he resembles. John Barrymore's laughter was a series of short staccato peals that began with a deep grunt and ended like a clash of cymbals. People talk about his profile, his beautiful speaking voice, his acting. My memory of him is of the animal laughter, that abdominal laughter that was like a loud wind crashing through a primeval forest, an absolutely uninhibited laughter, as uninhibited as the man himself. One day, the great Valentino brought a group of his friends to lunch at the Algonquin. The usual mob had followed to the door, but when he sat down in the rose room, none of the other guests showed any surprise. They noticed his entrance and saw him sit down, but there was no to-do about it. His companions, Italians, and at the Algonquin for the first time, looked around amazed that there was no stir created by the appearance of the idol. The waiters served him with no more deference than they showed other guests, and Georges, the head waiter, stood at his usual place. Nobody fought for the privilege of entering the dining room. From where I sat, I could see Valentino's face change color. He was not a particularly handsome man. He had a rather sallow complexion, and his black patent leather hair was beginning to thin. He looked like a gigolo, the kind one sees on the Riviera, a dancer waiting for some middle-aged woman to invite him to dance with her at so much per. All the publicity in the world could not have created such a psychosis in women. There undoubtedly was something else which no male can fathom. And there Valentino sat that morning with 100 or more people at adjoining tables, and nobody seemed to take any particular notice of him. After a while, he caught my eye and came to my table to shake hands, hoping that would attract attention, but it didn't. Turning to face the room, he asked in a loud and angry whisper, "What's the matter with the people here? Are they all dead? I visited the Institute of the Blind, and even the blind knew when I was there." No, I said, "They are not dead. They are hungry." But I'm not, Valentino retorted, and he stalked out without retrieving his coat from the cloakroom, followed by his muttering companions.
Thanks, Marana. I'm Kevin Fitzpatrick. The first thing I want to say is to Marana what a gift this book is. Because there hasn't been a book like this in more than 70 years. A book that is a first-person account of someone who was in that room in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. So this book is a gift to lovers of New York City history, old Broadway, old film. Thank you to SUNY Press. This is the only publisher that would be the home to such an amazing book. And because I've written so much about Dorothy Parker and the Algonquin Roundtable, people ask me quite a bit, could there be another Algonquin Roundtable? Is this person the new Dorothy Parker? And I usually have a variation of 2 words, hell no. Nobody writes about things like your grandfather. There isn't a scene like that anymore, and there never will be again. Nobody wrote so beautifully like your grandfather did about the Met Gala the other night. That doesn't happen any longer. Plus, the people your grandfather's writing about are poets, writers, authors, playwrights, stars. People love this era. They love this Gatsby era. I mean, that is why Gatsby sells 1 million copies a year. That's why it's on Broadway again. There's another Broadway show coming out. People love this era. So people are going to love this book so much because your grandfather's writing about an era that doesn't exist anymore. It's such an amazing time capsule of a lost New York City that's not around anymore. And I think it's going to be a very big book, and I already know from my friends and fans online who bought it last week, they love it. They can't get enough of it. They're digging into it, and I hope it has a long life. And I also think that you've done an enormous service to people by taking that box of papers to SUNY Press and saying, I think I might have a book here. Because I know from experience as an author of 8 books that you want to find that audience, and you have found that audience. You're here in this fantastic, wonderful room that all of those people came in. You're literally walking the footsteps of your grandfather. You are right where he was, and that is very, very rare. This is such a cool story that it should not be lost on audiences and readers today, that what you've done doesn't happen very often. And so it's a huge honor for me to be here and to meet all of you and to celebrate this book. And it's really all I can say is thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Little New York kid growing up at the Algonquin, seeing sights like few kids did growing up at the Algonquin, visiting Granny and Grandpa each week, staying for a show. I talk to Harpo and also speak to friends like Lerner and Lowe. Dad would drive us, and what fun showing up at the Algonquin. Me, the cute and car-sick one, throwing up at the Algonquin. But this klutz classmates teased, last picked on a team, found that back at the Algonquin, life was like a dream. Like the evening Grandpa Ben complained about all the noise on the floor below him, keeping him up. It was Lerner and Lowe writing, I could have danced all night. Or the time that Granny was flashed on the corner by Marilyn Monroe. You think this Mick is something, Mrs. Bondi? You should see what's underneath. I wish I'd been invited over that day. Broadway actors by the bunch line the lobby, a whole chorus. Iggy Wolfington, and at my bar mitzvah lunch, Oscar Peterson played for us. This is true. Sang along with Ella Fitzgerald, not Mitch, and kissed Terry Moore, my crush from Monty Joe Young, called Agnes Moorehead the mean old witch, and heard Olivier snore. Saw the Rick Grace and the Lunts, Marlene Dietrich got makeup. I was too young for her then. Brendan Behan sober once. Noel Coward once he'd wake up after a marvelous party. Most had checked in with St. Pete. Still they were supreme, growing up at the Algonquin. Life is like a... Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa, for that sweet dream.
Extraordinary book and its extraordinary author. I hope it's been conveyed just what a special book this is. A time capsule, as Kevin said. There will not be another book like this. There will not be any more first-hand accounts by an author this extraordinary. You know, authors are sort of peculiar people. They're at once living in the world, and then they're also observing. This man was an extraordinary observer. He's here. He saw everything. He was among these extraordinary people, but he was taking notes quietly, and these notes are now compiled into this extraordinary book. So in addition to having the company of Ben Hecht and Dorothy Parker and that whole crowd, you have his extraordinary company. You know, he is the presiding spirit of this book, and he's an incredibly charming, personable, warm, intimate narrator. And here we are privileged to spend 190 or 200 pages in his company. So you feel that as well.
I'm going to read one last thing tonight because it was something Grandpa wrote in the book about atmosphere. And it struck me that we sort of are creating an atmosphere tonight amongst ourselves here that he's kind of talking about the Algonquin's atmosphere back then. Outwardly, the Algonquin has little to distinguish it from a dozen other hotels in New York, but is a hallmark of the city. What Wall Street is to brokers, Broadway to the theater, Hollywood to the movies, this hotel is to writers, musicians, actors, and to those who, to breathe, require an atmosphere outside the drabness of the commonplace. Atmosphere is not something tangible that can be selected in a shop out of 1,000 other pieces and placed in the right corner by an interior decorator. It is an elusive something, an aggregate of many things come into existence slowly, not deliberately, from the very people who need it so they may function properly. Chairs, rugs, tables, lamps, and draperies are outside trappings. One hears often, too often, interior decorators talk about atmosphere and pretend that they can create it. They cannot. No one can. Atmosphere flows out of an intangible something. Atmosphere is what light is to the lamp, what life is to the body. Atmosphere has evolved a fraternity and sorority that is beyond race, creed, politics, finances, and the span of an individual life. It is in places where you meet or see or greet with a nod or a handshake someone you had seen the year before, 2, 3, 5,000 miles away, in Damascus, Paris, Budapest, or on New York's 44th Street. Someone with whom you have a community of feelings, of spiritual longings, an inexplicable something that binds certain men and women together.
Mirana Abbott Comstock is, first of all, she's brilliant. She's a brilliant writer. I've known her forever. Konrad Bercovici was a legendary member of the Algonquin Roundtable. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but throughout our lives, the topic of conversation was always the Bercovici family, and most specifically, Konrad Bercovici. I mean, this could be a TV series. This really could. They've done so much on Amazon with Hollywood and other things, but the New York Times should definitely do a feature. This is part of our history, and she shares it so beautifully in her introduction, and also the magnificence and grandeur of her grandfather, Konrad Bercovici. I am in awe, and I'm so happy to be here.
It's so wonderful to see you two together, and it's wonderful to see you championing her like a good friend.
Oh, what a legacy.